Chapter 576. Both Chu Xiu and Mr. Lu smiled when they heard En Lionian say that he had colluded with the demonic path. However, they were only here to kill today, and a dead man did not need to know too many things, nor did they need to talk to him before he died to ease his nervousness. Therefore, there was no need to talk nonsense, and they could just kill him directly. Chu Xiu unsheathed the heavenly demon dance and slashed out with the 3 blades of Avicii. Monstrous demonic flames surged, and the power was not inferior to En Lionian's 5-technique sword at all. The 3 blades of Avicii was a demonic blade, but its core concept was hatred. It was a blade of hell that carried madness and hatred. It was precisely because of the 3 blades of Avicii that Chu Xiu was able to suppress the blade of hatred when he used the 7 demon blades. The power he needed to use was much less than when he used the greedy blade or other blades. At this moment, when Chu Xiu used the 3 blades of Avicii again, he suddenly had a new understanding. The side effects of the 7 demon blades were very great, so it was actually only a half-finished product. The master refiner of the Black Demon Tower had wanted to gather the experts of the Black Demon Tower to research a technique that could be used with the 7 demon blades. However, the Black Demon Tower was destroyed because of the great ancient calamity. No one knew whether the people inside were dead or alive, so the technique was naturally not researched. However, just because they could not research it did not mean that the current Chu Xiu could not. Since he could control the power of hatred through the 3 blades of Avicii, why could he not try to control the power of greed, anger, obsession, love, evil desire, and so on? As long as he could completely control the power of the 7 emotions and integrate it into the demonic blade, would it mean that he could counteract the side effects of the 7 demon blades? With that thought in mind, Chu Xiu slashed out once again. This time, there were no longer any traces of the 3 saber techniques of Avicenaraka. Only the saber intent was similar, and it looked like it was filled with overwhelming hatred. Mr. Lu was shocked. If it was not for the fact that Chu Xiu was holding the heavenly demon dance, he would have thought that Chu Xiu had used his trump card, the 7 demon blades. Previously, they had discussed that if they could capture him alive, they would do their best to capture him alive. However, Chu Xiu had already used his trump card. This was not right. As the blade slashed down, boundless hatred surged out from the pitch-black demonic chi. At the same time, it also triggered En Lionian's own hatred. The hatred in En Lionian's heart was very simple. He hated the world for being unfair to him. It was his honor to be born in the same era as Chu Kuanga, but it was also his sorrow. He was honored that he was able to witness the rise and fall of a great hero, a legend of the Jianghu. Sadly, he was not even qualified to serve as a foil to the hero. But to be born in the same era as Guan Siyu was also his honor and sorrow. He was honored that he, who had been nurtured and raised by the Guanzhong torture room, would one day be able to witness the true prosperity and stability of the Guanzhong torture room, establishing a foothold in the Jianghu. Their strength would far surpass that of their predecessors in the Guanzhong torture room. Sadly, the one who had created all of this was not him, but his opponent. Although his heart belonged to the Guanzhong torture room, he would most likely be a negative character in the records of the Guanzhong torture room in the future. He would be an ambitious great leader of the criminal division, who did not listen to the hall master's orders and controlled his army. Now facing Chu Xiu, En Lionian no longer felt sorrow or honor. He only felt hatred. His eyes were slightly red, and the force of the sword in En Lionian's hands even became a little violent. However, it was also starting to become chaotic and unstable. For a swordsman, it was a very terrifying thing to be unable to control the force of the sword. As an opening was discovered by Chu Xiu, he slashed down with the heavenly demon dance. That hateful strike was unleashed to the extreme, completely shattering the golden sword in En Lionian's hands. En Lionian suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood as the blade entered his body. However, it was also because of this mouthful of blood that a hint of clarity flashed in his eyes, and he did not continue to be lost in that hatred. At this moment, En Lionian had woken up, while Chu Xiu had entered a state of enlightenment. There was no longer any enemy before him. There was only his own blade, as well as the sword intent that was filled with overwhelming hatred. Mr. Lu also noticed that something was wrong with Chu Xiu. However, he then heaved a sigh of relief and even nodded with a smile. revealing a hint of satisfaction on his face. As expected of the phaseless demon sect, Chu Xiu was the first genius that Mr. Lu had set his eyes on. To think that he had actually entered a state of enlightenment during a battle. Enlightenment was a very mysterious thing for warriors. Regardless of whether it was Taoism, Buddhism, or demon, everyone knew that after entering a state of enlightenment, one's thoughts would be like a heavenly steed soaring into the sky, and one might be able to comprehend something. However, no matter what one comprehended, it would all belong to them. Outsiders would not even be able to replicate it, as no one's enlightenment would be exactly the same. However, the majority of martial artists would have an epiphany when they saw two powerhouses fight, or when they saw something that touched their heartstrings, or when they saw a magnificent scenery that touched their state of mind. Only then would they have an epiphany. Legend had it that the junior celestial master, Zhang Qingzhen, had entered a state of enlightenment while bathing in thunderstorms on a stormy day. He had even used his one with heaven realm cultivation to draw in the power of thunder, and imprint a lightning mark on a cliff on Mount Longhu. Now, however, Chu Xiu had entered a state of enlightenment during a battle. This was very rare, and it was also the easiest for danger and others to interrupt him. Therefore, Mr. Lu had been guarding beside Chu Xiu. He did not attack too intensely, as he only wanted to prevent An Liuanian from counterattacking. At this moment, Chu Xiu's mental state was indeed very mysterious, and it could be described as a heavenly steed soaring into the sky. The saber intent of the hatred blade could be cultivated. One had to understand this power, use it, and then suppress it until one could control it. Back when he had cultivated the three sabers of Avicii, Chu Xiu had done this. Now that he had come into contact with the power of the hatred blade, he could even use the sky demon dance to simulate 70% of the power of the hatred blade. The more he used it, the more proficient he became, and the hatred blade was now completely under his control. Moreover, Chu Xiu could use the same method with the other sabers. He would first use the 7 demon sabers, then comprehend the power within them. Finally, he would transform the essence of the power into his own, and finally, he would be able to control the 7 demon sabers perfectly. Chu Xiu did not know if this was considered a cultivation method, but he knew that if his deduction was correct, he would be able to control the power of the 7 demon sabers perfectly in the future. Moreover, the most important thing was not the 7 demon sabers, but the fact that Chu Xiu could control the 7 emotions, which did not belong to the power of heaven and earth, but the emotional power that was rooted in human nature. Chu Xiu had not told anyone about these realizations. If he were to discuss it with a martial arts master like Chen Qingdi, Chu Xiu would know that his current understanding of the martial way was already stronger than most martial arts masters. The martial way, any cultivation method, and any martial arts technique would eventually become a kind of Tao. It was like an obscure sentence that was extremely concise and pointed to the core. This was the Tao. However, most people could not comprehend this Tao. Therefore, martial arts masters who had comprehended this Tao would annotate this sentence. Although it seemed extremely complicated, from a dozen words to hundreds of thousands of words, it allowed more people to understand it. Even if they only understood a little, they would be able to unleash a certain amount of power. This was the true essence of martial arts cultivation methods. When a cultivation method was cultivated to the extreme and completely comprehended, one would naturally come into contact with the Tao within. Therefore, ordinary martial artists would first cultivate the cultivation method, then progress from small success to great success, and finally to the extreme. Only after comprehending the Tao within would one be considered to have reached perfection. Currently, Chu Xiu was directly comprehending the Tao within, which was similar to that of a martial arts master. It was just that he had not completely perfected a cultivation method that could pass on this Tao. At this moment, An Liuanian had clearly also noticed Chu Xiu's state. However, with Mr. Lu harassing him from the side, he did not even have the chance to interrupt Chu Xiu's enlightenment. Most importantly, An Liuanian only wanted to escape. How could he have the spare time to think about interrupting Chu Xiu's enlightenment? Seeing that Mr. Lu was hot on his heels, Chu Xiu was about to complete his enlightenment, and Gong Shuyuan was watching coldly from the side. An Liuanian gritted his teeth. The blood around him boiled, and he actually condensed a blood sword with his own blood. Actually, Enlionian's martial way was an ancient sword cultivation method. It was very ancient, so ancient that even in ancient times, not many people would cultivate it. Enlionian's 5 sword techniques first required him to use his blood and willpower to refine the sword in his hand. Then he would cultivate a sword technique in tandem with his own sword. Finally, he would reach the stage where his heart and mind were connected. This kind of sword cultivation method was too complicated. Moreover, once something happened to one's weapon, it would be a very serious blow to one's strength. Therefore, this kind of sword cultivation method was slowly eliminated, and not many people would cultivate it. However, the reason why this kind of sword cultivation method was eliminated was not because it was not strong enough, but because it was too complicated. Therefore, it was not used by the large sections. However, this technique was a treasure to Enlionian, who had been a mere constable in the pugilistic world back then. He had relied on this outdated sword technique to cultivate all the way to his current level. Now that Enlionian's golden sword had shattered, it matched the ancient martial art practitioners' evaluation of this kind of sword cultivation method's flaws. However, Enlionian had considered this before. Once his 5 sword techniques were destroyed, it meant that he was at the end of his rope. Since it had already come to this, he definitely had to fight with his life on the line. At this time he no longer cared about flaws. The only way to survive was to fight with his life on the line. The blood sword replaced the golden sword and merged with the 5 sword techniques. The power of the 5 elements combined into one, stirring up the winds and clouds. The power that erupted in that instant even forced Mr. Lu to retreat temporarily. Chu Xiu sighed. He had wanted to capture Enlionian alive, but judging from Enlionian's current state, it was obvious that he was prepared to fight to the death. Therefore, Chu Xiu also grabbed Greed's blade. In that instant, the demonic blade was unsheathed, triggering Greed to devour everything. The sword light of the 5 elements combined was completely devoured by Greed's blade. Even Enlionian's protective chi of vigor was completely devoured. There was a loud bang, and blood splattered. Enlionian's corpse fell to the ground. His eyes were wide open, and his face was filled with grievances. Chapter 577. Enlionian did not die without regret, because he only realized in the end that he had guessed wrong. Previously, he had thought that Chu Xiu was only colluding with the demonic Tao. It was only when Chu Xiu revealed his greed blade that he realized Chu Xiu's true identity. Previously, Chu Xiu had used Lin Ye's identity to heavily injure Su Xing and kill Xinjiang Zi. There were many witnesses to these 2 incidents. The news that Lin Yi had obtained a set of 7 demonic sabers in the minor Fan Tian and possessed astonishing might had also spread. Many people knew about it, and Enlionian had naturally heard about it. Therefore, it was only at his death's door that he realized that Chu Xiu was Lin Yi, and Lin Yi was Chu Xiu. It turned out that Chu Xiu had never colluded with the demonic Tao. He had been a member of the demonic Tao from the beginning. This was a huge secret, but Enlionian would never have the chance to reveal it again. Gong Shuyuan walked over and looked at the hideous blade scars on Enlionian's corpse. He said with some disdain, "I told you to make the corpse more complete, but you ended up like this." Mr. Lu said unhappily, "This is already not bad. Those Grandmaster puppets that you obtained were almost cut into pieces by you, let alone a single scar." Gong Shuyuan snorted and did not reply. He just put Enlionian's corpse away and said to Chu Xiu, "It will take some time to refine the human puppets. I will get someone to inform you when I'm done here." Mr. Lu nodded and said, "We should also go. I met a martial artist from the Hidden Devil lineage previously. He said that Longhu Mountain's celestial master abode, moon-worshipping cult, Sabodhi Monastery, and other forces had discovered the remains of a branch hall of the 3 Pure Temple. At this time, Longhu Mountain's Zhang Xiling, moon-worshipping cult's Yun Zhongjuan, and the others have already put aside their prejudices and are working together to break the formation. It is estimated that it will take 2 or 3 days to break the formation. We will be in time if we rush over." Chu Xiu's heart stirred. The 3 Pure Temple? After entering the minor Fan Tian, Chu Xiu finally came into contact with some of the secrets of the ancient times. including the magnificent flourishing age of martial arts in the ancient times, which was displayed before Chu Xiu's eyes. Just based on the ruins in Xiaofan Heaven, the martial arts of the ancient times might not be stronger than the current martial arts, and it wasn't as systematic as the current martial arts. However, the advantage of the ancient martial arts was that it was unconstrained, and there were all kinds of strange methods that surpassed your imagination. It was just like Gong Shu Yuan's puppet refining method. If it was in the ancient era, it would be called an innovation. But now it would be considered an evil method that violated human ethics. Mr. Lu thought that Chu Xiu didn't know about the Three Pure Temple, so he explained, "The Three Pure Temple is the leader of the ancient Tao sects, a supreme sect. The Three Pure Temple is the leader of the 3,000 Tao sections. Even the Celestial Master Mansion, the real martial arts sect, and the Chunyang Tao sect combined are not as powerful as the Three Pure Temple in the ancient times. The real ruins of the Three Pure Temple haven't been discovered for so many years, not in the outside world, and not in Xiaofan Heaven. But this time, even if it's just a branch hall, the treasures inside are immeasurable. Otherwise, Taoists, Buddhists, and demons wouldn't be able to unite." Chu Xiu nodded. Mr. Lu looked at Gong Shu Yuan and said, "The Three Pure Temple is open. Are you going to go?" Gong Shu Yuan scratched his disheveled hair and said, "Forget it, I won't go. That kind of place isn't suitable for me. If I can't get anything, and a few puppets are destroyed, it won't be worth it." In fact, Gong Shu Yuan's strength wasn't weak. He came from the Xianwu sect, and he was a genius in puppetry. He was proficient in all kinds of martial arts and formations. However, his fighting strength wasn't too strong because he wasn't good at fighting. For example, if Chu Xiu controlled the Grandmaster level puppet, its power would be completely different from Gong Shu Yuan's. Although Gong Shu Yuan's strength wasn't weak among the warriors of the same level if he used all his skills, he was distressed about his puppets. He didn't want to lose them. A ruin like the Three Pure Temple's branch hall would definitely attract the experts of the Taoists, Buddhists, and demons. This kind of intense situation wasn't suitable for him, so Gong Shu Yuan didn't go. Seeing Gong Shu Yuan say so, Mr. Lu didn't force him. He directly brought Chu Xiu to the Three Pure Temple. However, this time, Chu Xiu didn't use the identity of Lin Yi. Instead, he used his own identity. After appearing in Xiaofan Heaven for so long, Chu Xiu should use his own identity. Moreover, the competition in the Three Pure Temple must be extremely intense. At the moment, the Taoists, Buddhists, and demons had joined forces. However, when they fought, the demons would definitely be the one at a disadvantage. Moreover, he had seriously injured Su Xing and killed Jin Yangzi. He would definitely become a thorn in the eyes of the Taoists and Buddhists. At this time, it was safer to use the identity of Chu Xiu. After parting with Mr. Lu, Chu Xiu headed east. There was no night in Xiaofan Heaven, only daytime. However, there was no sun in the sky. The further east he went, the brighter the light became. After walking for nearly a day, there were waves of power fluctuations in front of him. Chu Xiu walked over to take a look. There were actually 200 to 300 people gathered there. It seemed that more than half of the warriors who entered Xiaofan Heaven had already arrived. And the appearance of the Three Pure Temple's branch also appeared in front of Chu Xiu. If Mr. Lu hadn't said that this place was just a branch, Chu Xiu would have thought that this was the real Three Pure Temple. There was no other reason than that this relic was too magnificent. From the outside, the entire branch looked like a huge bronze palace. Apart from the doors and windows, there were no gaps. The most important thing was that this palace was very large. It had a radius of more than 10 miles. It didn't look like a palace at all. It was more like a small city. The bronze walls of the palace were engraved with all kinds of mysterious Tao patterns. Some of them had become a little blurry over time, but they gave people a simple and desolate feeling. And there was also a huge black tortoise cauldron that was 30 feet tall placed at the main entrance of the palace. In the past, when the Three Pure Temple was strong, this place must have been filled with incense and Tao. However, it had become desolate and silent now. At that moment, there were more than 10 martial Tao masters in front of the main entrance of the Three Pure Temple. There were less than half of them that Chu Xiu knew. In the Dao sects, there was the Purple Knight Divine Lord Zhang Xiling from the Celestial Master Mansion of Mount Longhu, and Taoist Guang Ning from the True Martial Arts sect. In the Buddhist sects, there was an eminent monk from the Sabodhi Monastery. That eminent monk's name was Jingchan Kongdu. His Dharma name was a little strange. Looking at his appearance, he didn't look like someone from the Central Plains. Instead, he looked like someone from the Western region. In addition to Jingchan Kongdu, there was also a fat monk with big ears and a fat body. He was also breaking the formation. He was not from the two Buddhist sections. Instead, he was an expert from another Buddhist temple. In addition to these two people, Chu Xiu also saw Su Xing in the crowd. At that moment, Su Xing had already healed the injuries caused by greed. However, he did not participate in breaking the formation. Su Xing was the chief of the Dharma Institute. He was not good at things like formations. As for the devil path, there were two people participating in breaking the formation. One of them was naturally Yin Zhongjuan. However, there was another person that Chu Xiu had never seen before. That person was a middle-aged man dressed in a black robe with Taotai patterns. He was handsome and had a small mustache. He had an extraordinary aura. Although Chu Xiu had never seen this middle-aged man before, Mr. Lu had previously introduced him to Chu Xiu. This person was also an expert of the devil path from the Yinma clan. His name was Miao Yu Chu Wuji. Moreover, this person's background was also extremely legendary. Chu Wuji was from the royal family. However, he was not from the Northern Yan, Eastern Qi, or Western Chu royal family. Instead, he was from the royal family of the Wei Kingdom. It was the Wei Kingdom that was a vassal of the Eastern Qi. The Northern Yan destroyed the Wei Kingdom. Now it had become the Northern Yan's Wei County, which was also Chu Xiu's hometown. Chu Wuji used to be a prince of the Wei Kingdom. However, his heart was in Jianghu and he had no intention of becoming the emperor. Therefore, his brothers did not see him as a threat. Instead, they tried their best to give him all kinds of resources and help, so that he could live in Jianghu peacefully, and not compete with them for the throne. The last emperor of the Wei Kingdom also loved his youngest son the most, and gave him everything he wanted. Therefore, the first 20 years of Chu Wuji's life were all in spring. It could be said that everything went smoothly for him. At the age of 20, he stepped into the state of oneness of heaven and men. At his peak, he was ranked 5th on the Longhu list of that generation. He was forthright and generous. He liked to make friends with disciples of famous sects, heroes in Jianghu, and friends from all walks of life. He had a wide network in Jianghu and was praised by many people. Therefore, he was called Young Master Wei Chu Wuji. As a result, the Wei Kingdom was destroyed by the Northern Yan, and the royal family of the Wei Kingdom were all killed. Chu Wuji fell into madness and went to seek help from his old friends, the powerful disciples of famous sects, to avenge him. As a result, some of the disciples of famous sects comforted him, while some of them were hypocritical and perfunctory. Some of them even refused to see him. The killing in Jianghu was related to the fighting in the court, but it also had nothing to do with each other. The two sides were inextricably linked, but the only thing they had in common was that they tried their best to get involved in the affairs of the court when it was not related to their own interests. Based on their friendship with Chu Wuji, it was impossible for them to harm the interests of their sections. Later, Chu Wuji, who had seen through the coldness of the world, found a group of rogue cultivators who were very close to him. Although they were not as powerful as Chu Wuji, some of them were willing to fight with Chu Wuji with their lives. But the result was miserable. These people, who did not even have a Wu Dao Grandmaster, tried to find trouble with the Northern Yan. As a result, they were wiped out by the Northern Yan military. Except for Chu Wuji, who escaped with serious injuries, the others died there. No one knew what Chu Wuji was thinking at that time. But after the incident, Chu Wuji disappeared for more than 10 years. When he reappeared, he was already a Wu Dao Grand Master of the Yinma clan. He began to slaughter the masters of the Northern Yan military who attacked the Wei Kingdom in order to avenge the Wei Kingdom. In the past, Fang Longquan, the general of the Northern Yan military stationed in Wei County, had one of his arms cut off. It was said in Jianghu that it was Chu Wuji who did it. These were all legends in Jianghu. And according to Mr. Lu, the Yinma clan had a higher evaluation of Chu Wuji. Among the people of this generation, Chu Wuji was one of the most promising grandmasters to enter the real fire spiritual cultivation realm. Of course, the premise was that he could solve the flaw in his state of mind. Chapter 578. It was rare for the Taoist, Buddhist, and demon sects to put aside their prejudices and work together to crack the array calmly. There were also a few other martial Tao grandmasters who were proficient in array formations. This was a rare scene. Along with Chu Xiu's arrival, a wave of discussion resounded in the surroundings. Here comes another one. It's Chu Xiu from the Guanzhong torture room. The top 5 of the Longhu leaderboard are almost all here. I wonder if there will be any changes in the rankings this time. Of course there will be changes. Have you heard that Lin Yi, who is ranked 7th on the Longhu leaderboard, obtained 7 devil sabers in the Xiaofan heaven, severely injured the Dharma Institute's master, Su Xing, and even killed the Chunyang Dao sect's Zhen Yangzi? With the achievement of killing a grandmaster, Lin Yi should be able to enter the top 5 of the Longhu list, right? Don't forget about Li Feilian, who hasn't appeared in the Jianghu for many years. He severely injured Zhen Yangzi with 9 slashes. Without him, Lin Yi wouldn't have been able to kill a martial Dao master like Zhen Yangzi. There are so many experts in Lesser Mortal Sky. Do you think it will threaten little celestial master Zhang Qingzhen's position? He's been number 1 on the Longhu leaderboard for so many years. I'm sure there are many people waiting to take that position. I don't think it's possible. You haven't interacted with the little celestial master before, so you don't know how strong he is. This little celestial master from Longhu Mountain is definitely a dragon among men, much stronger than you can imagine. Zhang Qingzhen is a genius that only appears in Dragon Tiger Mountain in 1,000 years. The supreme figure of the previous generation of Taoism was immortal Ning Xuanji. Because of this, the true martial arts sect became the supreme figure of Taoism. Now that the Celestial Master Mansion is the leader of Taoism, who knows if the Celestial Master Mansion can cultivate a second Ning Xuanji? I say, Dong Xiangqi, are you crazy? Wasn't it because your Jailing Dong family was humiliated by Qinqing Di, and the Celestial Master Abode helped you put in a few good words in front of Qinqing Di? Do you really need to go to the Taoist Master's residence and lick his boots like this? A second Ning Xuanji? Why don't you call him a second LV Chunyang? Bullshit. What kneeling and licking? Could the matters between martial artists be called kneeling and licking? I'm just telling the truth. A bunch of people were arguing nonstop. However, with the arrival of Chu Xiu, the top 5 of the Longhu leaderboard were all gathered. Even the top 10 were present. Zhang Qingzhen, who was ranked first, stood behind Zhang Xiling and watched her break the formation attentively. However, according to the rumors in Jianghu, Zhang Qingzhen didn't seem to know how to use formations. Zhong Xian, who was ranked second, was still expressionless. He stood next to Su Xing, his eyes shining brightly. No one knew what he was thinking. Fang Qishao was originally standing with Sword King cities by Qian and Lin Kaiyun. When he saw Chu Xiu, he lazily waved the sword in his hand as a greeting to Chu Xiu. However, he seemed to come to his senses later. Raising his sword in greeting seemed like a provocation, so he put it down and shook his head. His unruly appearance made by Qian's eyebrows twitch. He secretly transmitted a message to Fang Qishao to pay attention to his image, even if he was as expressionless as Zhong Xian. Ying Bailu, who was ranked 5th, stood beside Yan Fian. He maintained a certain distance from her, neither too far nor too close. Not only did he express his admiration, but he also didn't make Yan Fian feel annoyed by him. Although most of the people present were men, even they were convinced by Ying Bailu's infatuation. With the Yunu Palace's rules and Yan Fian's identity, it was almost impossible for the two of them to be together. Of course, if it were any other time, there would still be a slight possibility. Yan Fian's aptitude was ordinary, and the Yunu Palace had other successors and didn't care about a disciple like her. If the Shangshuaying clan could pay a sufficient price, the Yunu Palace would expel Yan Fian from the sect, and she would naturally be able to marry Ying Bailu. Furthermore, the Yunu Palace didn't break their rules. But now, Yan Fian didn't have any thoughts about Ying Bailu. Even if she did, the Yunu Palace wouldn't let her go. Chu Xiu also saw Li Feilian among these people. He didn't stand with the devil sect, nor did he stand with the righteous sect. Instead, he stood there alone with a blank expression. It was as if there was a vacuum around him, and no one approached him. Previously, Li Feilian hadn't appeared for several years. Everyone thought that he was too scared by the Chunyang Dao sect to appear, or that he had died in an accident. In the end, who would have thought that he dared to attack the Chunyang Dao sect's martial Dao grandmaster, Zhen Yangzi, and severely injured him with 9 strikes? Although Zhen Yangzi was killed by Lin Yi in the end, if it wasn't for Li Feilian, Lin Yi's 7 demon saber wouldn't have been able to kill Zhen Yangzi no matter how strong it was. With reference to Su Xing, Zhen Yangzi would at most be severely injured. This person was also a ruthless person. He had endured for many years, and when he attacked, it was a fatal blow. When his flying saber was unsheathed, it would take blood and soul. Even a martial Dao grandmaster wouldn't dare to say that they could completely block it. Among the warriors of the same level, probably only the top 10 of the Longhu list could block his flying saber. Brother Chu, you're finally here. What's the situation over there? Why are you so slow? Xie Xiaolu walked over and asked. Lu Fengxian and Luo Feiheng also followed behind him. After seeing Chu Xiu, Lu Fengxian just nodded slightly. He knew the situation, so there was no need to ask too much. Chu Xiu spread out his hands and said, I was entangled by something in a relic. There are so many messy things in Xiaofan that it's impossible to guard against. I almost suffered a loss. Xie Xiaolu nodded, but he didn't suspect anything. After all, there were all kinds of dangers in Xiaofan. Although Chu Xiu was stronger than them, there was nothing he could do if he was unlucky. Chu Xiu pointed at the 3 pure temple and said, Have they been breaking the array for the past few days? Xie Xiaolu said, Of course not. When the 3 branches of Taoism, Buddhism, and demonic meet together, of course they have to fight first before taking action. Although the demonic Dao is at a disadvantage in terms of numbers, the martial Dao grandmasters that came from the demonic Dao are really not weak. Not to mention Yun Zhongjuan of the 9 great divine Magispriests, he is very strong. He once suppressed Chunyang Dao sect's Zhen Yangzi outside. And that Miaoyu Law Supreme, Chu Wuji, is also very strong. With 1 slash of the Blood Moon Blade, he almost broke the Dharma Court's head Su Xing's golden body. He fought alone against the Dharma Court's head Su Xing, and the great Prajna Temple's abbot, smiling Mithria Qi Jian, and still had the upper hand. That's right, Qi Jian is that fat monk. After fighting for so long, there was no clear winner, so they decided to join forces. Chu Xiu nodded and subconsciously looked at Su Xing. Su Xing's face had been dark before. So Chu Xiu thought he hated him for being injured in the Black Demon Tower. But now, Chu Xiu felt that he was provoked by Chu Wuji's strength. At this time, the other people of Jianghu were also looking around. The top few on the Longhu list had already arrived, but Lin Yi was still missing. Why hadn't he appeared yet? However, some people had already found an excuse for Chu Xiu. In their opinion, Lin Yi was most likely afraid. Since entering the minor mortal world, Lin Yi had shown brilliantly. To be precise, it should be said that he had gone on a killing spree. He had killed the people of Southern Song's Xiahou clan and Gao Ping's Lu clan. The Dharma Court's head Su Xing had been seriously injured by his saber, and Zhen Yangzi of Chunyang Dao sect had also been killed by his saber. It could be said that Lin Yi had offended the 9 great families and the Taoist and Buddhist sects in succession. This was not an ordinary kind of courage. At this time, if Lin Yi dared to appear here, even Yun Zhongjuan and Chu Wuji would not be able to protect him. Moreover, the only person who would protect Lin Yi should be Chu Wuji. Yun Zhongjuan would only protect the moon-worshipping sect's saintess. Why would he care about an outsider from the hidden devil lineage? At this time, Guan Xiyu walked over and asked Chu Xiu, Did you encounter any danger along the way? Chu Xiu cupped his hands and said, Thank you for your concern, Hall Master. I did encounter some trouble, but I still gained something. Guan Xiyu nodded and said with a slight frown, That's good. By the way, have you seen Enlionian? Enlionian was a martial Dao master, and his speed was naturally much faster than a martial artist at the unity of heaven and man realm. As long as he was not teleported to the most remote place, he would not be able to see a single person. In that case, he should have heard about the discovery of the 3 pristine temples branch hall by now. However, An Leonian had not appeared. This made Guan Xiyu somewhat worried that something had happened to him. In fact, although Guan Xiyu and An Leonian did not see eye to eye, neither of them wanted anything to happen to the other. An Leonian knew that the Guanzhong torture room's current scale was all thanks to Guan Xiyu's planning. Therefore, nothing could happen to Guan Xiyu. Guan Xiyu also knew that the Guanzhong torture room's status was sensitive. He could not rely on his reputation alone, so he needed someone to support him from below. An Leonian was the person behind the Guanzhong torture room. Therefore, Guan Xiyu was a little anxious now that An Leonian had suddenly disappeared. Chu Xiu shook his head and said, "I haven't seen the great leader either." Guan Xiyu sighed softly. Although he felt that something was amiss, he was not too anxious at the moment. After all, An Leonian was a martial Dao master. He knew what to do in such a situation. As long as he did not encounter any danger that he could not resist, he should be fine. After thinking about it, Guan Xiyu told Chu Xiu, "When the Three Pristines Hall opens later, just stay at the back with your friends. Don't get involved in the fight for the guru level. Otherwise, even the aftermath of the fight might injure you accidentally." Chu Xiu nodded. However, if Guan Xiyu knew that Chu Xiu had killed more than one martial Dao master, he would not think that way. Therefore, although Chu Xiu had agreed to it now, it would still depend on the situation when the Three Pristines Hall opened. At that moment, a majestic array formation fluctuation attacked in front of the Three Pristines Hall. Yin Zhongjuan and the others retreated, and the entire ground trembled in an instant. Boundless radiance blossomed from the formation Dao that soared into the 9 heavens. The gate of the Bronze Palace also slowly opened, emitting ear-piercing creaking noises that revealed a desolate feeling. Endless array formation radiance bloomed, and went straight to the 9 levels of heaven. The Bronze Palace's door also opened slowly and let out an ear-piercing creak, revealing a desolate feeling. Chapter 579. The door of the Three Pristines Hall opened, but no one moved first. The martial artists at the back naturally didn't dare to move since the martial Dao masters in the front row didn't move. Although everyone knew that although it was dangerous to seize the initiative, the benefits were greater. But in front of a group of martial Dao masters, there were really not many people who dared to seize the initiative. Were they courting death? Yin Zhongjuan and the others looked at each other and slowly walked toward the open door. It was so dark inside that they couldn't perceive anything with their perception. After everyone walked in, the entire bronze hall suddenly became brightly lit. The candlelight suddenly flashed in the bronze lamps, immediately startling everyone. But with the help of the light, everyone could see the scene inside the bronze hall. Compared with the Spirit Treasure Temple, or the Black Demon Tower that Chu Xiu had been to before, the branch halls of the Three Pure Temple were a bit too neat. The surrounding bronze pillars were engraved with Dao patterns, bronze lamps hung, and there were praying mats around. Obviously, people often preached here. At the front of the hall were 3 heavenly venerate statues. However, the strange thing was that the 3 heavenly venerate statues didn't have faces. To be precise, their faces were covered by smoke, so it was impossible to see what they looked like. Just as everyone was sizing up the hall, a voice suddenly rang out. "Welcome, latecomers." Everyone present was suddenly shocked. Even the martial Dao masters stared in the direction of the voice. Even with their strength, they didn't find any vitality in this hall. Who was speaking? Right in front of them, under the 3 statues of the heavenly venerables, spots of brilliance condensed, and a figure wearing a moon-white Taoist robe dotted with star patterns appeared in front of everyone. The figure was a middle-aged Taoist with a long beard, a square face, and a peaceful smile on his face. Just by standing there motionlessly, he gave off a feeling of immortality. But what was strange was that although the Taoist was looking at them, everyone had a feeling that he didn't seem to see them, but a mass of air. Yin Zhongjuan said in a deep voice, "It's not a human." The martial artists behind were a little confused. What else could it be if not a human? Was it a demon or a ghost? Zhang Xiling also nodded and said, "It's indeed not a human. This should be an image imprint left by the Three Pristine Palaces expert using a formation." Right at this moment, the middle-aged Taoist suddenly said, "You're right, I really am not human." As soon as these words came out, Even Yin Zhongjuan was shocked. It was not an image mark, but a living thing? However, the middle-aged Taoist said, I'm just a projection that was prepared in advance, so I'm not a human. I also don't know if you're humans or not. Since you can see this video of me, it proves that the branch of the Three Pristines Temple was not damaged in the Great Tribulation, but I also don't know how many years have passed. 100 years? 1,000 years or 10,000 years? I don't even know if you're humans, monkeys, or something else. I don't even know if you can understand me. However, since the Hall Master has asked me to leave these things behind, I will speak. My name is Lugio, the 9 of 1, 2, 3, and 4. My original name is not Lugio, but because I like the word 9, I changed my name to Gio. Nothing in this world is perfect. Gio is the extreme, but my name is Lugio, and I haven't reached the extreme yet. At this point, Lugio showed a helpless expression and said, Sorry, I talked too much nonsense. It's time to get down to business. Seeing Lugio's behavior, Chu Xiu and the others subconsciously looked at Feng Qixiao. Why is this ancient expert's temper so similar to Feng Qixiao's? He's still so talkative on such an occasion. Being stared at by Chu Xiu and the others, Feng Qixiao shrugged uncomfortably and said, Why are you looking at me? Although I talk a lot, I'm much more handsome than this old ox nose. As soon as this remark came out, many Dao sect disciples immediately glared at Feng Qixiao. Who the hell are you calling an ox nose? Bai Qian glared at Feng Qixiao fiercely. Shut up. Quiet. Don't talk. Feng Qixiao covered his mouth and nodded repeatedly. At this moment, Lugio continued. The Hall Master said that although the Great Calamity has arrived, there are 50 De Yen numbers. Out of 49, the one that escapes is a chance of survival. Our Dao sect is also willing to leave behind some things as an inheritance for this chance of survival. Hearing this, everyone's breathing became heavier. They suddenly had a feeling that the Three Pristines Temple, which seemed to be the most difficult, was actually the easiest relic. The formation outside was not an offensive type, but a defensive formation to prevent the Three Pristines Temple from being damaged in the ancient calamity. Therefore, although it was a little difficult to break the formation, there was almost no danger. After entering, there were no traps, no killing formations, and even the inheritance was prepared for you. How could there be so many good things in the world? At this moment, Chu Xiu's feeling was different from the others. He only felt the strength and calmness of the Three Pristines Temple. After entering Xiaofeng Tian, Chu Xiu had seen many relics. In order to resist the Great Calamity, a top Dao sect like Spirit Treasure Temple was almost completely annihilated, leaving only a seriously injured eldest senior brother and youngest junior brother. The Black Demon Tower also seemed to be a top Demon Dao sect, but they left in a hurry and left behind a lot of things. Although the Blissful Demon Palace was slightly better, it was not much better. Those hungry ghosts were cultivated by the Blissful Demon Palace, but it seemed that they couldn't bring them along in a hurry, so they left them and Yuxian there. However, the branches of the Three Pristines Temple were neat and tidy. Even the cushions on the ground were placed in a picturesque manner. Lugio still had the mood to joke in the image imprint. He did not have the slightest sense of urgency that everyone had to escape from the Great Calamity. Moreover, Chu Xiu also remembered that in the diary of the Spirit Treasure Temple's youngest junior brother, it seemed that the Three Pristines Temple had given the Spirit Treasure Temple 2 places to let them leave. Thinking about the current situation, it seemed that the Three Pristines Temple had a way to avoid the Great Calamity of the ancient times, and they could even let the other Dao sects hide together. Was that why they seemed so calm? Lugio said with a smile on his face. If you also cultivate the martial arts lineage, then you must think that what we left behind is a cultivation method, a secret box and all kinds of pills and treasures, right? Everyone present was taken aback. What did this mean? Could it be something else? Lugio waved his hand, and the top of the hall became brightly lit. At the same time, 9 strange things were distributed in the top of the hall. It was a transparent ball-shaped object, protected by the formation plate. Within the formation plate, there was the silhouette of an exotic beast roaring and dancing about. Upon closer inspection, there was a seemingly transparent but constantly twisting power in the spherical object. Lugio said, This is the Tao accumulation, which belongs to the Tao lineage. There are a total of 9 Tao accumulation, and each Tao accumulation is different. Things such as cultivation methods and pills are too common. The Tao accumulation is the condensation of the essence of Tao. It contains countless universes. Isn't it much more powerful than cultivation methods? If you comprehend this Tao accumulation, you can even create countless cultivation methods. Of course, the premise is that you can comprehend this Tao accumulation. When he said the last sentence, there was a hint of a smile in Lu Jiu's tone. Except for the martial artists from the Tao lineage, the faces of the others had already darkened. For the martial artists from the Tao lineage, the Tao accumulation was indeed a good thing. As long as they could comprehend it thoroughly, the benefits obtained were indeed stronger than cultivation methods and pills. However, for the martial artists from the Devil Buddha lineage, or those who cultivated the sword principle and other cultivation methods, it was extremely difficult to comprehend the Tao accumulation. At least, it was much more difficult than the martial artists from the Tao lineage. This was not as practical as cultivation methods, pills or weapons. If it was a pill or a weapon, it could be used directly. Even if it was a cultivation method, it could also be used as a reference. However, the Tao accumulation had to be comprehended to have an effect. Otherwise, it would be a waste. Previously, they thought that the people from the Three Pristine Temple were really kind and took the initiative to leave the good things behind. As a result, they now knew that the Three Pristine Temple was indeed kind, but only to the people from the Tao lineage. Lu Jiu laughed and said, "All right, the things are also given to you. However, I guess that if any of you are not from the Tao lineage, you must be cursing the Three Pristine Temple in your heart. Everyone has their own selfish motives. The things left by the Three Pristine Temple naturally have to be given to the people from the Tao lineage. However, you don't have to be discouraged. There are still some fierce beast souls sealed on the array plate. Swallowing them will be a great supplement, and will be very effective for the growth of your mental strength. It is fate that brought us together, so I will also give you something. However, these fierce beast souls are not only supplements, but also used to eliminate those who fish in troubled waters. For those who are not strong enough, retreat for the time being. Otherwise, you will not be swallowed by the fierce beast souls, and be swallowed by the souls instead. Everyone, I have finished speaking. Maybe we will meet again if fate allows it." As soon as he finished speaking, the image of Lu Jiu disappeared. Above the main hall, the light of the matrix shone brightly, and the fierce beast souls directly erupted with terrifying waves of power. They manifested themselves and hid the Taoist connotation in their bodies. Looking at the crowd below, they let out roars. The strength of these souls was already between the martial Tao Grand Master and the unity of heaven and man realm. It could be said that those who were qualified to compete for this thing had to at least have the strength of the unity of heaven and man realm. As for the others, they could only watch the show. The entire hall suddenly fell into silence, but the next moment, countless gang qi erupted. Whether it was the martial Tao Grand Master or the warriors at the unity of heaven and man realm, they all jumped up and rushed towards the 9 souls. Although the Tao accumulation was the most effective for the warriors of the Tao lineage, it was still a treasure. Even if he could not use it, he could not let the people of the Tao lineage get it. Chapter 580. A group of martial Tao Grandmasters fought fiercely in the main hall. The power was so powerful that it seemed to be able to overturn mountains and seas. The branch hall of Three Pristine's temple was protected by a formation, and the place was large enough to accommodate so many martial Tao Grandmasters fighting here. The moment those martial Tao Grandmasters rushed up, Chu Xiu did not choose to fight with them immediately. Those people attacked with all their strength. Although Chu Xiu was qualified to fight with them now, it was limited to one-on-one battles instead of this kind of tangled warfare. The same went for the other young martial artists. They were all waiting to see what would happen. There were only 9 Tao accumulations, but there were more than 20 Wu Dao Grandmasters present. At least more than half of them couldn't get the Tao accumulation. Even if they got it, they would have to fight with the fierce beast souls to get it. Zhang Xiling of the Celestial Master Mansion was one of the strongest martial artists among the Taoist, Buddhist, and demonic lineages. He did not care about the so-called fierce beast souls at all, so he gathered the purple heaven thunderbolt in his palm and slammed it down. The fierce beast souls that looked like flying tigers wailed as they were directly smashed by Zhang Xiling's purple heaven thunderbolt. Moreover, the smashed souls did not dissipate directly. Instead, they turned into fragments and fell to be picked up by other martial artists. These shattered soul essences actually had the same effect of strengthening one's mental energy. This immediately caused many cultivators to fight over them. They could not get the Tao accumulation, but it was better than nothing to get these soul fragments. Just when Zhang Xiling was about to put the Taoist connotation into his bosom, a sonic boom resounded. Zhang Xiling suddenly felt a powerful force pressing down on him. It was as if MT Tai was pressing down on him. Suddenly, the lightning around him shot up to the sky, transforming into a thunder talisman in front of him. A strong force hit him, and the thunder talisman was destroyed in an instant. Zhang Xiling was also blasted away by the punch. The powerful fist intent could destroy all laws. Even the purple heaven thunderbolt could not block it. Zhang Xiling could not help but be furious when he saw who it was. Chen Qingdi, what the hell are you doing? You want to comprehend the Tao? You're just like a piece of trash after getting that Taoist connotation. Why are you snatching it? Chen Qingdi's martial Tao was like his person, simple and direct to the extreme. Things like Tao enlightenment had nothing to do with Chen Qingdi. Chen Qingdi snorted and said, "It's useless to me, but my disciple is useful. That disciple of mine has a natural root of wisdom. If he were to comprehend this Tao accumulation, wouldn't it be a wonderful thing to become a celestial master or celestial venerable?" Looking at Chen Qingdi's appearance, Zhang Xiling couldn't help but grit his teeth. He knew that Chen Qingdi was here to disgust him. Tao accumulation was of no use to Chen Qingdi's lineage. However, Mount Longhu and Chen Qingdi had some disagreements. Last time, during the Dong family's opening ceremony, Chen Qingdi had humiliated the Dong family in jailing. After that, it was unknown whether it was Chen Qingdi's intention, but the World Alliance had annexed a lot of the Dong family's forces and territories. The Dong family had been scared out of their wits by Chen Qingdi. At this time, they naturally didn't dare to talk nonsense with Chen Qingdi. Therefore, they could only seek help from the Celestial Master Mansion. The Celestial Master Mansion did not lack martial Tao grandmasters, but the mentality and character of each person were different. The person whom the Dong family sought help from was a little arrogant and conceited. He did not take Emperor Chen Qing seriously, and actually used the power of a disciple of a large sect to oppress Emperor Chen Qing. Based on Chen Qingdi's character, he didn't want to be enemies with the Celestial Master Mansion. However, the Celestial Master Mansion relied on the fact that they were the leader of the Tao sects to talk nonsense to him. Chen Qingdi wasn't so easy to provoke. Fortunately, an elder martial artist of the true fire spirit refinement realm from the Celestial Master Mansion arrived in time. He reprimanded the Grand Master of the Celestial Master Mansion and explained the matter clearly. Only then did the matter was settled. However, it was obvious that Chen Qingdi was very upset. He was a person who needed to vent his anger. Now Zhang Xiling had become his target. Zhang Xiling had dealt with Chen Qingdi more than once. He knew that Chen Qingdi was such a person. He was also very helpless. This guy was simply a lunatic. He was a lunatic who would fight to the death with anyone when he was crazy. Fortunately, they didn't fight last time. Otherwise, Chen Qingdi would really dare to kill someone. Not only did Zhang Xiling sink into depression, but Jingchan Kongdu of the Buddhist Sabodhi Monastery and Qi Jian of the Great Prajna Temple had also gained something. The same was true for Yin Zhongjuan and Chu Wuji of the Devil Dao. Even people like Guan Siyu and Bai Qian of the Sword King City, who didn't belong to the three factions, did not encounter any resistance. With their strength, there weren't many people in the same realm who could compete with them. The only people who were targeted were the people of the Tao sects. Even the people of the Buddhist sects and the Devil Dao were targeting the Tao sects. In the current Jianghu, the strength of the Tao sects was already strong enough. This Tao accumulation was only a reference in the hands of the Buddhist sects. If it fell into the hands of the Devil Dao, it might be of some use. After all, many people in the Devil Dao also cultivated demonic techniques related to the Dao sects. However, if this thing fell into the hands of the Dao sects, it could even greatly improve the strength of the experts in the true fire spirit refinement realm. It could also increase the chances of a martial arts master to advance to the true fire spirit refinement realm. Currently, the distribution of forces in the Jianghu was actually very balanced. Taoism and Buddhism kept each other in check. Under their joint suppression, the Devil Dao was slightly weaker. The remaining 9 big families, 5 big sword sects, or the 4 big divine powers which had deep hatred for each other. The 6 big gangs which were scattered like sand could not pose any threat to the Taoism and Buddhism. However, if the Dao sects obtained these 9 Dao accumulation, the balance would definitely be broken. Therefore, Su Xing of the Great Prajna Temple and Qi Jian of the Great Prajna Temple were basically targeting Taoist Guangning of the true martial arts sect. There were only a few martial artists in the Dao sects. In addition, Zhen Yangzi was killed by Chu Xiu, and Zhang Xiling was entangled by Qin Qingdi. After fighting for such a long time, the Dao sects didn't even get a single Dao accumulation. This made Taoist Guangning constantly curse these people for being shameless. At this moment in a corner, Yu Qifeng of the White Tiger Hall had gathered his murderous intention, an evil spirit to the extreme. After Xiahozhen had just used his primordial spirit secret method to suppress and kill a ferocious beast's soul, the overwhelming White Tiger evil spirit shield was like a storm of swords and knives, directly shrouding Xiahozhen. Xiahozhen snorted coldly. The imperial spirit technique drew the qi of heaven and earth, turning it into a storm to protect his body. However, at that moment, a scarlet bloodlight attacked. Xiahozhen suddenly shivered, and his figure immediately moved to the side. However, at this moment, Yu Qifeng's figure emerged from the bloodlight, and directly took the formation plate that contained the Dao accumulation in his hand. Yu Qifeng proudly raised his head at Xiahozhen, and said with a laugh, "Patriarch Xiaho, thank you for helping me get rid of that ferocious beast's soul. That thing was completely manifested by the power of the spirit. If I want to get rid of it, it will take some effort." Xiahozhen glared at him. However, before he could counterattack, he saw Zhang Qingzhen's whole body shining with thunder patterns, and he stepped forward. This group of martial arts masters had been fighting for so long. It was time for Zhang Qingzhen, Chu Xiu, and the other outstanding young martial artists to make a move. The first one to stand out was Zhang Qingzhen. The thunder patterns in the white Taoist robe shone, and the thunder light shone on Zhang Qingzhen's handsome face. At this time, Zhang Qingzhen looked like an immortal who had descended to the world. Zhang Qingzhen was aiming at Yu Qifeng. Seeing this scene, Yu Qifeng swallowed his saliva and laughed. "Young celestial master of Dragon Tiger Mountain, I have no enmity with your celestial master mansion. Why don't you go to Buddhism and Taoism to rob things? Why are you staring at the Dao accumulation in my hand?" Yu Qifeng's attitude was a little soft, and he did not want to fight with Zhang Qingzhen. Everyone present could not believe it. Was this still the hot-tempered and murderous Yu Qifeng of White Tiger Hall? In fact, Yu Qifeng had never dealt with Zhang Qingzhen. White Tiger Hall was far away in eastern Qi, and he rarely dealt with Celestial Master Mansion. However, he did not want to fight with Zhang Qingzhen. It was not because he was afraid or cowardly, but because he had no confidence in his heart. Zhang Qingzhen had dominated the Longhu list for nearly 10 years. It was recognized by the world that his combat power was comparable to that of a martial arts master. Not to mention the one who had died in his hands, more achievements had not been spread. Even now, most people said that Zhang Qingzhen had not been promoted to the realm of martial arts master because he wanted to accumulate, or because he was practicing some secret method. If he wanted to be promoted, he could step into the realm of martial arts master at any time. But no matter what, Zhang Qingzhen was a junior. If Yu Qifeng won, it would be dishonorable. If he lost, his reputation would be ruined. Moreover, Yu Qifeng did not have much confidence in winning. However, at this time, Zhang Qingzhen did not answer. He took a step forward and formed a Taoist seal with his hand. The blue lightning around him turned into a roaring thunder dragon, and rushed straight toward Yu Qifeng. Seeing that Zhang Qingzhen had made a move, Yu Qifeng gritted his teeth. A ferocious saber that was close to the height of a person appeared in his hand. The incomparably ferocious white tiger divine shield condensed on the body of the saber, gathering boundless killing intent and evil spirit. He slashed down with a loud bang and collided with the thunder dragon. In the blink of an eye, thunderous storms and howls resounded incessantly. The thunder dragon was torn apart, but the blue lightning exploded with a loud bang, directly smashing the 6 revolution precious weapon in Yu Qifeng's hand. He also took a few steps back, his eyes showing a look of horror. He could only describe Zhang Qingzhen's power as terrifying. At this time, the others looked at Zhang Qingzhen as if they had seen a ghost. Previously, they had all heard that Zhang Qingzhen was very strong here and there, but to what extent he was strong no one knew. But now, they knew that in the face of such a famous martial arts master like Yu Qifeng's weapon was directly shattered in a head-on fight, and he was also blasted away. Other than terrifying, the people present could not think of any other words to describe it. Perhaps it was more appropriate to describe it as terrifying. Yu Qifeng's face was red, not because he was injured, but because he was ashamed. Being blasted away by a junior martial artist with one move, no matter how thick Yu Qifeng's face was, he could not stand it at this time. With a low roar, the white tiger divine shield around Yu Qifeng's body condensed together and turned into a ferocious tiger. With monstrous killing intent, it took the initiative to attack Zhang Qingzhen. Chapter 581. The White Tiger Hall's White Tiger Evil God Power could be said to be the sharpest among the countless gang qis in Jianghu. Previously, Yu Qifeng had held back a little bit of strength because he was afraid that it would be difficult to explain to Zhang Qingzhen if he really killed him, so he held back a little bit of strength. As a result, this time, Yu Qifeng was really angry and directly attacked with all his strength. Yu Jin's white tiger was full of killing intent, and the powerful sharp will rushed into the sky. The whole white tiger seemed to be made up of blades, and its breath was extremely powerful. Zhang Qingzhen was still expressionless. Blue thunder gathered around him, and with a wave of one hand, it pressed down. The boundless thunder actually condensed into a fierce tiger, and it rushed straight toward Yu Qifeng. The tiger roared, and the 2 fierce tigers collided in mid-air. In an instant, killing intent splashed everywhere, and the power of thunder devoured everything. Yu Jin's white tiger was actually devoured by the thunder at a speed visible to the naked eye. Yu Qifeng's face suddenly changed as he was hit by the power of the thunder, and his figure retreated more than 10 steps back. Zhang Qingzhen stepped forward, and his palm fell. The thunder pattern in his palm suddenly lit up, and it was dazzling. The palm fell like a thunderclap, and countless thunder bloomed in his palm, enveloping Yu Qifeng. Everyone present widened their eyes, and there was a look of horror in their eyes. It was said that the junior celestial master Zhang Qingzhen had a thunder pattern in his palm, and now it seemed that this was the case. The power of this thunder was not drawn from the power of heaven and earth, but it was completely his own power, but it was already stronger than most martial arts masters. Yu Qifeng roared angrily, and the white tiger evil divine shield, which carried boundless baleful aura, was unleashed to the extreme by him, forcibly resisting the power of this thunder. The killing intent turned into a blood-red blade, about to slash towards Zhang Qingzhen. But at this time, Zhang Qingzhen fell again, and 5 thunderbolts as thick as buckets smashed down. The 5 thunderbolts pulled each other, and the aura of heaven and earth, with the power of heaven and earth, directly hit Yu Qifeng, causing him to vomit blood. The Dao accumulation formation plate also fell into Zhang Qingzhen's hands. 5 thunders execution. Some of the people present could not help but exclaim. Longhu Mountain's celestial master Abode's 5 thunders technique was very famous, but in reality, there were not many who could successfully cultivate it. To cultivate the 5 thunders, one had to first cultivate the 5 qis. The power of the 5 thunders belonged to the 5 internal organs of the body. One had to build a very solid foundation in the 5 qis origin realm before one was qualified to cultivate it. Therefore, the starting point of the 5 thunders art was the 5 qis collecting in the origin realm, and the cultivation process was very difficult. Those who could successfully cultivate it were mostly martial Dao grandmasters from Dragon Tiger Mountain. However, when Zhang Qingzhen performed it, it was as smooth as flowing water, without any hindrance. Yu Qifeng covered his numb chest, which had been struck by the Five Thunders execution, and his eyes flickered with horror. However, he didn't even say a word and just turned around to leave. Being defeated by a junior martial artist was already shameful enough. What else could he say at this time? Tell Zhang Qingjin to be careful. This matter is not over yet? Did they really think that the Celestial Master residence on Longhu Mountain was just for show? Zhang Xiling, who was fighting with Chun Qingdi, suddenly lit up and shouted, "Qingjin, take the Taoist connotation and leave." Zhang Xiling finally realized that the Buddhist demon lineage definitely didn't want to let the Dao sect lineage have an easy time. It was impossible to get too many Taoist connotations. Therefore, Zhang Qingjin left first and found another opportunity to get another Taoist connotation. As for the people from the true martial arts sect and the other Dao sects, he couldn't care less. However, at this time, Zhang Qingjin didn't leave. Instead, he held the array disc with Taoist connotation and turned his eyes to the crowd. "I know that you want the Taoist connotation very much, but you also don't want me to get it. Some people also think that I've been sitting on the Longhu list for too long. Today, I'll give you this opportunity. Zhongxian Fangqi Xiao, Chu Xiu, Ingbai Li Feilian, all of you come at me together. If you defeat me, the Taoist connotation will be yours. The first place on the Longhu list will also be yours." As soon as these words came out, the crowd suddenly went into an uproar. Everyone looked at Zhang Qingjin in a different way. They even suspected that the person who said these words was a fake Zhang Qingjin. He actually took the initiative to challenge all the young heroes who used to be in the top 5 of the Longhu list. If it was a one-on-one battle, everyone admitted that Zhang Qingjin was indeed strong. However, people like Zhongxian, Fangqi Xiao, and Chu Xiu weren't weak either. At least, the gap between them was absolutely not to the extent of heaven and earth. But now Zhang Qingjin actually opened his mouth to challenge these 5 people. It could even be said that he was arrogant, but in fact, Zhang Qingjin wasn't an arrogant person. In the Jianghu, whether it was the older generation of martial artists or the younger generation of martial artists, their impression of Zhang Qingjin was almost the same, and that was that he had a sense of propriety. Zhang Qingjin had always been a person who had a sense of propriety. He was neither arrogant nor rash, nor overly modest. He was a person who conducted himself appropriately and could be said to be perfect. But today, he was arrogant enough to challenge so many outstanding heroes on the Longhu list. What was Zhang Qingjin planning to do? Zhang Xiling couldn't help but shout anxiously, "Qingjin, what are you doing? Don't make trouble at this time. Quickly take the things and leave." Zhang Xiling had watched Zhang Qingjin grow up, so he naturally knew Zhang Qingjin's strength. However, he didn't think that Zhang Qingjin could be strong enough to fight all the outstanding heroes on the Longhu list. All along, Zhang Qingjin had been very calm, but who knew that today, Zhang Qingjin would actually do such an irrational thing? At this time, Zhang Qingjin seemed to not hear Zhang Xiling's words. He just stared unblinkingly at Zhongxian, Chu Xiu, and the others. Seeing this scene, Zhang Xiling was anxious, but there was no other way. Because he had watched Zhang Qingjin grow up, he also knew Zhang Qingjin's character. Although Zhang Qingjin's character had always been calm and easy to talk to, as long as it was something he had decided, no one could change it, not even the old celestial master. Chu Xiu squinted his eyes at Zhang Qingjin. He could vaguely guess what Zhang Qingjin wanted to do. Even he had to admit that Zhang Qingjin, the number 1 of the younger generation, was really bold. Zhang Qingjin wanted to use the pressure from them to break through and step into the martial Dao Grandmaster realm in the most perfect manner. To put it simply, Zhang Qingjin was taking a gamble, a very dangerous gamble. If he won the gamble, Zhang Qingjin would step into the martial Dao Grandmaster realm, becoming the first person of the younger generation to step into the martial Dao Grandmaster realm. He would always be the number 1 on the Longhu leaderboard, because no one could surpass him. However, if he lost the gamble and Zhang Qingjin was defeated, it was hard to say whether he would die or be seriously injured. His state of mind would definitely be affected, and his reputation would also plummet. Little Celestial Master Zhang Qingjin, who had never been defeated, was defeated because of his arrogance. Even the reputation of the Celestial Master Mansion would be affected to a certain extent. With Zhang Qingjin's strength in his realm, Chu Xiu believed that Zhang Qingjin definitely had 10,000 ways to safely step into the martial Dao Grandmaster realm and condense the true core. In the end, he chose the most difficult path, a path that was comparable to a gamble. Even Chu Xiu had to admit that Zhang Qingjin was bold, and he was worthy of his current ranking. A divine light flashed in Zhong Xian's eyes. A moment later, the earth energy around him exploded. He took a step forward and said indifferently, "Okay." At this time, Fang Qishao also put away his mischievous look and clenched the long sword in his hand with a solemn expression. "Zhang Qingjin, I've underestimated your courage. In fact, I've never liked you because your performance was too perfect. So perfect that when those old guys in Sword King City scolded me, they used you as a positive example." Bai Qian, who was fighting on the side, had a dark expression on his face. Why did Fang Qishao say everything? In Sword King City, there were indeed many elders who scolded Fang Qishao, telling him to be more serious and learn from Zhang Qingjin's way of dealing with people. However, that was only said in the inner circle. Outside, they wouldn't say that Fang Qishao was inferior to Zhang Qingjin. Wouldn't that make them lose their prestige? But now Fang Qishao had said it himself. Pointing his sword at Zhang Qingjin, Fang Qishao said in a low voice, "I never expected that you, Zhang Qingjin, would be so willful and so courageous. You want pressure? Fine, I'll give you pressure. 3 years ago, my Karma Sword Dao couldn't defeat your Thunder Sword Dao. Today, let's see if my sword is sharp or not." The 7th young Master Fang had always been very frivolous. Even when he was in a fierce battle, he gave off a frivolous vibe. But now Fang Qishao stood with his sword in hand, and the sharpness of his sword Dao shot into the sky. A boundless swordsman, test the world. A rare gratified expression appeared on Bai Qian's face. How good would it be if Fang Qishao could always maintain this state? In the future, their Sword King City would surely have another supreme expert with the titles of Sword Saint and Sword God. Unfortunately, with Fang Qishao's character, there were very few people in the world who could make him show such fighting spirit. Holding the heavenly demon dance in his hand, Buddhist light and demonic aura rose from Chu Xiu's body at the same time, soaring into the sky. The might was so powerful that there were even faint demonic howls and Buddhist chants ringing out at the same time. The strength of his foundation caused others to raise their eyebrows. I've long heard of the little celestial master Zhang Qingjin's great name. Now that I've seen you today, you really live up to your reputation. However, we don't have an undeserved reputation either. It could be said that this was the first time Chu Xiu had displayed his strength, and it immediately attracted the attention of countless people. Everyone knew that Chu Xiu cultivated demonic arts, but since he was from the Guanzhong torture room, no one suspected that he was related to the demonic path for the time being. Moreover, Chu Xiu later obtained the inheritance of holy monk Tan Yuan, and his Buddhist martial arts were also very powerful. He cultivated both Buddhism and demonic arts, but it was extremely smooth and natural. The power and momentum of this power were not inferior to that of Fang Qishao, and it was even similar to that of Zhong Xian. In the crowd, Mr. Liu did not make a move to snatch the Taoist connotation. Instead, he moved closer to Chu Wuji and secretly transmitted his voice. "This is the new talent of the Yinma clan. What do you think? Senior Wei Shuya likes him very much. After the Xiaofan heaven is over, Senior Wei is going to let Chu Xiu, or Lin Yi, take revenge on the 9th heaven mountain." Chapter 582. The Yinma clan was not monolithic. There were also close and distant relatives. Chu Wuji was one of them, so he already knew Chu Xiu's identity. Hearing Mr. Liu's words, Chu Wuji frowned slightly and said, "Senior Wei actually thinks so highly of Chu Xiu that he's willing to give him such an important mission? Would the other Yinma clan members be willing? After all, this is a good thing to gain prestige. It could even be said to be giving prestige for free. There are many seniors in the Yinma clan. Although their disciples are not as good as Chu Xiu, they are not weak either." Mr. Liu snorted lightly and said, "Those old things are all very cunning. In the past, when my Yinma clan was in the most urgent situation, they were all hiding in the dark like turtles. Now, seeing that my Yinma clan has recovered a little, they want to fight for credit? Dream on. Senior Wei is the last survivor among the 5 sky demons of the 9th Heaven Mountain. Whoever he wants to send will go. It won't be so easy for others to reap the benefits. Chu Wuji nodded. No matter what, he would definitely stand on Wei Shiya's side. When he was in despair and joined the diabolism, he had received a lot of kindness from Wei Shiya. If the righteous sects were hypocritical, then the diabolism was the cruel reality. Without strength, no one would treat you as one of their own. If Wei Shiya had not helped him several times, Chu Wuji might have been dead by now, and he would not have become a martial Dao grandmaster. At this moment, the whispering between Mr. Liu and Chu Wuji did not attract the attention of the people present. Their attention was on Zhang Qingzhen and the others. After Zhong Xian, Fang Qishao, and Chu Xiu expressed their stance, Ing Bailu also stood up with a gentle smile on his face and said, Brother Zhang is very courageous. I'll accompany you. In the end, Li Feilian did not say a word, but he held the flying knife in his hand and took a step forward. In terms of temperament, Li Feilian was actually the calmest among the people present. No one even knew what he was thinking. However, no matter how indifferent he was, Li Feilian was still a young man, and he had his own pride. Even if his ranking wasn't as high as Zhang Qingzhen's, he wouldn't reject Zhang Qingzhen's challenge, regardless of the outcome. Everyone present couldn't help but be excited when they saw this scene. This was a rare event that only happened once in 100 years. Zhang Qingzhen wanted to fight against 5 elites on the dragon and tiger list all by himself. Moreover, none of the 5 people he wanted to challenge were weak. Each of them had the strength to fight him alone. This was an extremely dangerous move. He wanted to use Chu Xiu and the others as whetstones, but it should be known that if he was not careful, he might also become a whetstone for Chu Xiu and the others. After a short period of silence, a wave of energy that caused the hearts of others to palpitate instantly erupted. Zhong Xian and Chu Xiu were the first to attack. Among the people present, no one could compare to Zhong Xian and Chu Xiu when it came to attacking fiercely and explosively. These two could be said to be the 2 people with the strongest attack power. Zhong Xian held the prison-suppressing Akalanatha seal in his hand, and the 4-armed Akalanatha hand formed a seal and smashed it down with a deafening sound. When Chu Xiu slashed out with his saber, demonic aura and sanguine aura condensed together. Its might was ferocious and powerful, but in fact his saber contained boundless hatred. The saber strike that was filled with hatred was aimed at Zhang Qingzhen's body, as well as his heart. Amidst the whistling wind, Zhang Qingzhen's long hair fluttered, and even a trace of lightning appeared in his eyes. He pressed his hands down, and green lightning condensed in his palms, turning into a dragon and a tiger. Green lightning splashed in all directions, and they rushed toward Chu Xiu and Zhong Xian. The clouds followed the dragon, and the wind followed the tiger. The power of the dragon and tiger gathered wind and clouds, guiding the lightning. With a boundless thunderstorm, it crushed Zhong Xian's prison-suppressing Akalanatha seal and Chu Xiu's knife, and it did not even make the boundless hatred in his knife play a role. However, at this moment, a flying dagger suddenly appeared in front of Zhang Qingzhen. There were so many martial artists present, and even some martial Dao masters did not see when Li Feilian used the flying dagger. Through the void, the knife locked onto Zhang Qingzhen's divine soul. At the same time, Fang Qishao's sword was already out of its sheath, and the tip of the sword was pointed directly at Zhang Qingzhen. Regardless of the thunderstorm, it could not stop the seemingly simple but powerful sword. The karma swordsmanship, the sword will hit the target. Fang Qishao and Li Feilian were both martial artists who had comprehended the karma swordsmanship. With a knife and a sword to lock the soul, Zhang Qingzhen could not escape. Even if it was Chu Xiu, he would have to use the heaven sun gazing at air skill to the extreme to be able to escape this knife and sword. However, Zhang Qingzhen did not want to escape. Standing in the same place, at the moment when the knife and sword were about to hit him, Zhang Qingzhen's figure turned into purple lightning. His speed was simply too fast, and he had moved a step in an instant. It even gave people an illusion that he was standing there, without moving. He gently pointed a finger, and a faint ray of lightning bloomed. However, it was this faint lightning that led Fang Qishao's sword and Li Feilian's knife, causing the two to collide. Li Feilian's flying knife was immediately broken, and Fang Qishao also took a step back. Zhang Qingjin actually relied on his extreme speed to break the karma swordsmanship. However, at this time, Ying Bailu, who had not made a move until now, also made his move. His martial path was not as fierce and violent as Chu Xiu's and Zhong Xian's, nor was it as mystical as Li Feilian's and Fang Qixiao's. However, his martial path did not have any obvious weakness, and he could adapt to any situation and assume any position. The moment Zhang Qingjin dodged, Ying Bailu had already made his move. In order to dodge the knife and sword, Zhang Qingjin's speed was raised to the extreme. In order to break the karma swordsmanship, Zhang Qingjin's attention was also raised to the extreme. Therefore, Ying Bailu did not make a move. He was waiting for Zhang Qingjin's state to change. As long as Zhang Qingjin relaxed a little, it would be his turn to make a move. And now, that opportunity had arrived. The ink-colored astral energy turned into a black dragon and condensed into a knife, with the dragon's head as the handle, the dragon's body as the tip, and the dragon's tail as the blade. Great Dragon Saber. The saber slashed down, accompanied by a dragon's roar. The saber intent was extremely sharp, and it just happened to seize the slight gap when Zhang Qingjin relaxed. Zhang Qingjin did not turn his head, and it was too late for him to do so. However, lightning condensed around his body, turning into a lightning talisman that shielded behind him. Lightning exploded, and the black dragon dissipated, but Zhang Qingjin was also blasted back more than 10 steps. In the first exchange, Zhang Qingjin had fallen into a disadvantageous position. However, in the crowd's view, it was normal for Zhang Qingjin to fall into a disadvantageous position. It would be strange if he could gain the upper hand. First, he displayed his terrifying strength with the Wind Cloud Dragon Tiger Lightning Force, blocking Chu Xiu and Zhong Xian, who had the fiercest physical strength. After that, he focused all of his attention and spiritual power to the extreme, and combined that with his lightning-like speed. He broke through Li Feilian and the 7th young master Fang's Tao of Karma. At this time he seemed to be relaxed, but in reality, he didn't have any extra strength left. That was why he was forced back by Ying Bailu, who attacked last. Seeing this scene, Chu Xiu and the others attacked again, but this time it was Fang Qixiao who made the first move. Sharp sword light sprinkled down. Fang Qixiao's sword seemed to have a mind of its own, sealing all of Zhang Qingjin's escape routes. As long as Zhang Qingjin made the slightest movement, the sword light would change, neither attacking nor defending, only trapping Fang Qixiao. Although Fang Qixiao was alone, the effect was similar to a sword formation. Zhang Qingjin said indifferently, "The Sword King City's siege sword formation? It's useless against me." Fang Qixiao raised his eyebrows and said, "Good eyesight, but whether it's useful against you or not we'll see later." Zhang Qingjin's figure moved, lightning flashing around him, but before he could break the formation, Zhong Xian's body was already shining with dazzling Buddhist light, crushing over. Behind him, the pharmacist's glazed light King Dharma idol protected him, and when the seal fell, it was like a landslide. Zhang Qingjin blasted out the 5 Thunder Execution technique in his hand. Although the power of the 5 Thunder Execution technique was extremely strong, and even seriously injured Yu Qifeng just now, in the face of Zhong Xian, whose physical cultivation was abnormally strong, even the 5 Thunder Execution technique could not hurt Zhong Xian. It only made the Buddha's light around him dim a little. At the same time, Chu Xiu's body bloomed with Buddhist light, and the shadow of Mahavairokkana appeared behind him. His palm fell, changing the sun to steal the heavens. Under the sun-changing technique, the power of the palm directly enveloped Zhang Qingjin, forcing Zhang Qingjin to shine with lightning, and layers of thunder talismans overlapped, but they exploded one after another. In the past, when Chu Xiu's strength was not as good as Zhong Xian's, he used the sun-changing technique to fight Zhong Xian head-on. At this time, Chu Xiu's strength was not what it used to be, and the power of the sun-changing technique was naturally not the same. Fang Qixiao's siege sword formation was around, and Zhong Xian was also in front of him. Zhang Qingjin could not move in a large range, and could only use thunder talismans to resist, but the powerful power of the sun-changing technique had already blasted Zhang Qingjin 3 feet into the ground. Ying Bailu was not idle either. The black gang qi around him evolved into the black dragon spear, and the spear momentum was big and wide. Together with Zhong Xian, who attacked fiercely, it was almost invulnerable. Bailu's martial arts were like this, ever-changing, hard and soft. No matter who he cooperated with, he could exert the greatest effect. And the most terrifying one was Li Feilian. He only had 10 flying knives, and the first knife was to test Zhang Qingzhen's strength. He had already tested Li Feilian's strength, and with Li Feilian's character he would either not use his knife, or when he did it would be a fatal blow. Chu Xiu and the other 4 had never cooperated before. On the contrary, there were more or less some grudges between them, or they were just passers-by. But now in the second round they already had a tacit understanding. In the first attack, both sides were testing each other, including Chu Xiu and the others, to test each other's strength. And when the second attack came, they found their own positions, the most suitable positions for themselves. Fang Qishao was in charge of intercepting, Zhong Xian, who had a strong body, was in charge of resisting, Bailu was in charge of supporting Zhong Xian, making up for the flaws in his wild fighting style. Chu Xiu was in charge of attacking head-on, and Li Feilian was always waiting for a flaw for a fatal blow. Chapter 583. In such a short time, Zhang Qingzhen was forced into a desperate situation. Everyone present could not help but shake their heads. Zhang Qingzhen was still a little too impulsive. None of those ranked in the top 5 of the Longhu leaderboard were weaklings. Zhang Qingzhen might be able to defeat them one-on-one, but it would be impossible for him to win so easily. However, he had to fight against 5 of them alone. His chances of winning were pitifully low. At this moment, Zhang Qingzhen was besieged by 4 people, and had Li Feilian glaring at him from the outside. However, his expression did not change at all. In fact, he had expected this scene from the beginning. Zhang Qingzhen had never underestimated anyone. If Zhong Xian, Chu Xiu, and the others were trash, he would not have challenged the 5 of them. In that desperate situation, Zhang Qingzhen's eyes switched between yin and yang. The unyielding yang qi and the cold yin qi burst out and condensed in the lightning. Lightning was born from the yin and yang qi. Lightning was yang, and lightning was yin. The Celestial Master Mansion cultivated the thunder method, but the Celestial Master Mansion was an orthodox Taoist sect. They cultivated the thunder method, but at the end of the day, they actually cultivated the way of yin and yang in the world. The thunder method was just a kind of power that evolved from the power of yin and yang. In an instant, 2 bolts of lightning, several feet thick, flowed around Zhang Qingzhen. One of them was as hot as fire, and the other was as black as ink, like mud. Yang lightning and yin lightning. The 2 forces combined and continuously spiraled and exploded. They tore apart Fang Qishao's siege sword formation, forced Zhong Xian and Bailu back, and forcibly resisted Chu Xiu's great sun-changing technique. Finally, they completely destroyed the Virokana shadow behind him. Li Feilian held the flying knife in his hand, and focused his mind to the extreme. However, he still did not use the knife in the end because he was not confident. When the 2 bolts of lightning dissipated, Zhang Qingzhen's face was slightly pale. Obviously, he was under great pressure to control this kind of power. At this time, Zhang Xiling was no longer in the mood to fight for the Taoist connotation. All his attention was on Zhang Qingzhen. Zhang Qingzhen was the future hope of the Celestial Master Abode. Nothing must happen to him. At this moment, looking at Zhang Qingzhen's appearance, Zhang Xiling couldn't help but mutter anxiously. He was too impulsive. I was too impulsive. The yin-yang infinite thunder that Zhang Qingzhen used just now was the secret method of the Celestial Master Mansion, which used the power of yin and yang to trigger the origin of thunder. Even the martial Dao Grandmasters of the Celestial Master Mansion did not dare to say that they could completely control the power of heaven and earth. Now that Zhang Qingzhen used these secret methods, it was obvious that he was also under great pressure. In fact, in the Celestial Master Abode, ordinary disciples would not be able to come into contact with so many cultivation methods and secret techniques. You would have to wait until you were strong enough, or until a master agreed to teach you. Only then would you be able to learn those cultivation methods and secret techniques. However, these rules were useless to Zhang Qingzhen. Those cultivation methods and secret techniques in the Celestial Master Abode could be read by Zhang Qingjin at will. After all, his status and strength were there. However, Zhang Xiling now regretted it. If he had known this would happen, he would not have let Zhang Qingjin learn so many secret techniques that he could not control. Everyone thought that Zhang Qingjin had a sense of propriety, but once he was willful, no one could stop him. Lightning flashed, and Zhang Qingjin made a Taoist seal with his hand. The Gang Qi around him burned fiercely, and a divine shadow condensed behind him. The Taoist connotation was ethereal, but it was surrounded by thunder. Anyone who understood the Tao lineage would be able to recognize that the divine figure was the heavenly lord of the 9 heavens responding thunder that the Tao lineage worshipped. The heavenly lord divine shadow made a Taoist seal with his hand, and with a wave of his hand, powerful thunder of 5 thunder execution, heavenly thunder of purple heaven, heavenly thunder of heaven, and other different attributes of thunder fell, and took the initiative to attack Chu Xiu and the others. However, Chu Xiu frowned slightly. What was Zhang Qingjin trying to do? Did he really want to force himself into a desperate situation? Chu Xiu's sun-changing technique had the power to steal the fortune of heaven and earth and change the sun. It absorbed the power of Virokana into one's own body, and the requirement for strength foundation was not ordinary. The human body could not withstand this power, and when used, the qi and blood in Chu Xiu's body seemed to be boiling and burning because of this power. Now that Zhang Qingjin's secret technique was similar to Chu Xiu's sun-changing technique, it also contained the power of the heavenly lord of the 9 heavens responding thunder, and heavenly lord of the 9 heavens. However, the consumption was not ordinary. His Gang Qi was consumed like flowing water. Not to mention that Zhang Qingjin was not a martial Tao Grand Master yet. Even if he had become a martial Tao Grand Master, the martial Tao True Core could not absorb so much qi of heaven and earth to consume. However, since Zhang Qingjin had already made a move, Chu Xiu and the others naturally would not dodge and attack together. Even Li Feilian had already slashed out his 3 flying daggers. The sky was filled with thunder and lightning, and the deafening roar of Gang Qi sounded. Being in the thunder and lightning, Chu Xiu also exerted his strength foundation to the extreme for the first time. Moreover, this was not the kind of battle with martial Tao grandmasters, but a fight between people of the same level. Everyone was in the oneness of heaven and man realm, but each of them exerted the power of this realm to the extreme. It could be said that the few of them were almost at the peak of the entire young generation in the underworld. Zhang Qingjin fought against 5 alone. He wanted to use the pressure of Chu Xiu and the others as a sharpening stone, so that his strength could reach perfection and step into the martial Tao Grandmaster realm. But in reality, in the battle, Chu Xiu and the others were not sharpening stones. Each of them was an extremely sharp blade. In the battle, they would either sharpen their opponent's blade, or both sides would suffer heavy losses. At this stage of the battle, the few of them had actually used their full strength, except for the secret technique of burning their blood essence. However, even though Zhang Qingjin had used this level of secret technique, he still could not withstand the joint attack of Chu Xiu and the others. In less than 100 breaths, the aura around Zhang Qingjin had gradually weakened. The divine image of the Divine Lord of Universal Thunder behind him had also gradually dimmed. Feng Qishao's sword turned into thousands of swords, and each sword strike blocked Zhang Qingjin's chance to dodge. Zhong Xian, on the other hand, held the great virtue Akalanatha seal in his hand, which had the power to shake mountains. Ing Bailu's body was surrounded by black energy, which turned into a black dragon that circled around him. Every time his fist landed, the black dragon would roar and roar. Chu Xiu also used his full strength. He performed the colorless sealing palm imprint, and the life and death in his palm could overturn heaven and earth. This was the strongest martial technique created by Master Tam Yuan in the past. When its power was unleashed to the extreme, it was even more powerful than the great sun-shifting technique. Li Feilian, who was at the back, had also unleashed 5 saber strikes at the same time. Apart from the saber strike that he had used to put his life on the line, this was already his full strength. Sensing the energy wave, even the martial Tao grandmasters present had a slight change of expression. Even a martial Tao grandmaster would not be able to withstand a pincer attack from the 5 of them. If it was Zhang Qingjin, he would most likely be dead as well. However, at this moment, Thousands of lightning bolts suddenly bloomed in Zhang Qingzhen's eyes. The universal heavenly lord's divine shadow behind him completely shattered, but it did not dissipate. Instead, it condensed into his body. As Zhang Qingzhen absorbed the divine shadow, the sky full of thunderstorms suddenly fell and shrouded Zhang Qingzhen. At the same time, the thunderstorms also completely destroyed the attacks of Chu Xiu and the others. The thunderstorms were evolved from the power of heaven and earth. No matter how strong a human was, they could not resist the power of heaven and earth. However, in the thunderstorms, Zhang Qingzhen was unscathed. His aura was even rising bit by bit. As his aura rose to the extreme, it was as if something had shattered, and a powerful aura immediately spread across the entire place. With a wave of his hand, the boundless thunderstorms around Zhang Qingzhen began to shrink completely. In the end, they turned into the size of a pill, and were swallowed by Zhang Qingzhen. In an instant, the thunderstorms surged like a thunderstorm. Thunderclap golden pill. Zhang Xiling looked at Zhang Qingzhen with a face of ecstasy and disbelief. Zhang Xiling was not too excited that Zhang Qingzhen had stepped into the martial Dao Grandmaster realm. Not to mention the celestial master abode. Everyone in the underworld knew that Zhang Qingzhen had stepped into the martial Dao Grandmaster realm. What he was really excited about was that Zhang Qingzhen had condensed the thunderclap golden pill that no one in the celestial master abode had condensed for thousands of years. The martial Dao true pellet realm was the most important realm for martial artists. At the same time, the three lineages of Taoism, Buddhism, and Demon had extremely detailed analysis of this realm, drawing the power of heaven and earth to refine the martial Dao true pellet in the Dantian, and communicate with the power of heaven and earth. Buddhism called it the Saraira, while Taoism called it the golden pill. When a golden pill was swallowed into the abdomen, one would know that one's fate was not up to the heavens. The so-called golden pill in Taoism was the meaning of the martial Dao true pellet. The martial Dao true pellet marked that a martial artist could officially connect with heaven and earth, step into a mysterious realm, and integrate with heaven and earth. The changes were different for each sect, and even for each person. For example, the lineage of the celestial master abode had cultivated thunder to the extreme, and stepped into the Grandmaster realm. What they condensed was the thunderclap golden pill. When they breathed, there would be the sound of thunder, and in an instant, they could transform the chi of heaven and earth into the power of thunder. However, the thunderclap golden pill was extremely difficult to cultivate. At least in the past 1,000 years, no one in the celestial master abode had successfully cultivated it. Zhang Qingzhen was the first. It was no wonder that after such a long time, Zhang Qingzhen could condense the martial Dao true pellet and step into the Grandmaster realm, but he had been accumulating it. It turned out that he had a big plan. He was actually preparing to condense the thunderclap golden pill that no one in the celestial master abode had refined for thousands of years. Shrouded in the boundless thunder, Zhang Qingzhen took out the array disc containing the Taoist connotation from the secret space box and threw it into the air. Under the blessing of the array, it floated above the hall. Looking at Chu Xiu, Zongxian, and the others, Zhang Qingzhen said in a deep voice, "I've lost the bet. I've lost, and the Taoist connotation is yours." After that, Zhang Qingzhen turned around and left. He didn't even help Zhang Xiling to continue fighting for the other Taoist connotation. Everyone on the scene was stunned. But then everyone realized that Zhang Qingzhen had a point when he said that he had lost. Fighting 1 against 5, Zhang Qingzhen was almost bound to lose. If Zhang Qingzhen hadn't stepped into the martial Dao Grandmaster realm in the last blow, he might have been seriously injured. But at the same time, although Zhang Qingzhen lost, he also won because he had achieved his goal. He had stepped into the martial Dao Grandmaster realm and condensed the thunderclap true pellet. Anyway, no matter what, Zhang Qingzhen didn't lose. Chapter 584. Zhang Qingzhen stepped into the Grandmaster realm and left calmly, but it almost drove Zhang Xiling crazy. You admit that you lost, so be it. Why did you throw out the Dao accumulation? Since Zhang Qingzhen has now become a Grandmaster, even if he wants to leave with the Dao accumulation, others can't stop him. Also, forget about throwing out the Dao accumulation in your hand. Why do you still want to leave? Did you forget that you still have a master's junior who is fighting here? Seeing Zhang Xiling's expression, Emperor Chen Qingdi sneered and said, there are a lot of people fishing for fame in your celestial master mansion, but this junior Zhang Qingzhen is not bad. He means what he says. Since he admitted that he lost, he will naturally hand over the Taoist connotation. I like this character. As for why he left, Zhang Xiling, are you stupid? You just stepped into the real pellet state, and your unstable and restless real pellet fought with others. Are you going to cripple this kid? Hearing Chen Qingdi's words, Zhang Xiling reacted. He just stepped into the real pellet state. Because the real pellet had just been condensed, it was not very compatible with his body, so he must first cultivate for a while to stabilize the real pellet. Zhang Qingzhen had just stepped into this realm, so it was naturally impossible to stay here and fight with others unless he didn't want his foundation. However, Zhang Xiling also glanced at Chen Qingdi in surprise. He actually came to remind me? Chen Qingdi said faintly. I've vented my anger by beating you up. The grievances between me and your Taoist master mansion are over, but if there are any cats and dogs barking in front of me, then don't blame me for being ruthless. Chen Qingdi knew the power of the Taoist master mansion. Although he was not afraid of the Taoist master mansion, he was not crazy enough to fight with the Taoist master mansion to the end just because of some quarrel. If he really wanted to fight to the death, he would have killed the real fire spirit refinement state powerhouse of the Taoist master mansion in the past. Even though the other party had a true fire spirit refinement realm expert, in the eyes of Chen Qingdi, an old true fire spirit refinement realm expert could not stop him. Zhang Xiling furrowed her brows as she watched Emperor Chen Qingdi leave. The incident in Chen Qingdi was an undeserved disaster for him. After all, he wasn't the one who did it. However, through this incident, Zhang Xiling also saw some of the shortcomings of Longhu Mountain's celestial master abode. It was time to talk to the old celestial master to restrain the disciples of celestial master abode. It was inevitable for the disciples of large sects to be arrogant, but the Tao sect advocated purity and inaction. If one's state of mind was filled with obsession, it would not only affect one's own cultivation, but it would also affect the future development of the sect. Just look at the current Chunyang Tao sect. Its obsession was too deep, and its actions were too extreme. The celestial master abode was not like this in the past, but as the Chunyang Tao sect weakened and the true martial sect kept a low profile after Ning Xuanji's disappearance, some people in the celestial master abode really regarded themselves as the leader of the Tao sect and the supreme of the martial arts world. Such a mentality could not be tolerated. Otherwise, it would be like the incident in Chen Qingdi, where they offended a powerhouse for no reason. Unfortunately, the brain sometimes had nothing to do with martial arts cultivation. Even though some people had cultivated to the Grandmaster realm, their brains were still a little useless and could not see through these things. At this time, in the field, Chu Xiu and the others were standing on the spot, motionless. Zhang Qingzhen was the #1 person of their generation. He had been at the top of the Longhu list for nearly 10 years, and no one could surpass him. Now that he had stepped into the martial Tao Grandmaster realm, he was automatically excluded from the list. Therefore, although this position was given up, it could be said that Zhang Qingzhen had defended this position himself. Therefore, everyone present felt a little complicated. Zhong Xian and Zhang Qingzhen had been fighting for more than 10 years. The two of them, one Taoist and one Buddhist, had fought countless times. Most of the time, Zhang Qingzhen was slightly superior. However, because it was not a battle of life and death, no one knew who would emerge victorious. But now, Zhang Qingzhen was one step ahead of him. This made Zhong Xian, who had always been calm, feel a little upset. On the other hand, Fang Qishao's expression was a little ugly. Of course, given his character, it was not because he was jealous that Zhang Qingzhen had stepped into the martial Tao Grandmaster realm, but from today onward, he would probably be scolded by the old guys in Sword King City again. His willfulness would cause trouble, but Zhang Qingzhen's willfulness would cause him to condense the Thunder Golden Core and step into the martial Tao Grandmaster realm. The gap was too big. For a long time to come, Zhang Qingzhen would still be regarded as his positive example. Everyone looked up at the Tao accumulation that Zhang Qingzhen had dropped in the air. Chu Xiu was the first to attack. The heavenly demon dance in his hand was filled with hatred, and he slashed at Zhong Xian with boundless blood devil qi. Just now, Zhang Qingjin used them as whetstones to bear the pressure in order to make a breakthrough. However, Chu Xiu and the others had also accumulated the foundation of the oneness of heaven and man realm in that battle. In fact, Chu Xiu even thought that the battle was too short. If it was a little longer, although Chu Xiu could not break through to the martial Dao Grandmaster realm in the battle like Zhang Qingjin, he could at least push the accumulation of the oneness of heaven and man realm to the peak. Therefore, although Zhang Qingjin had left, the others were still there. Zhong Xian was a very good opponent. Last time, at Master Tam Yuan's place, Chu Xiu fought with Zhong Xian. Although that battle seemed to be a draw and they were evenly matched, Chu Xiu knew that he had lost. He had tried his best to fight Zhong Xian to a draw, but Zhong Xian still had strength to spare. If it wasn't for Master Tam Yuan's appearance in the end, Chu Xiu would definitely be the loser. Now, Chu Xiu's cultivation had improved further. He was ready to see who was stronger between him and Zhong Xian. Zhong Xian's eyes glowed as he held the bright king seal in his hand to meet Chu Xiu's saber. However, at the next moment, Chu Xiu could sense a clear battle intent from him. It was obvious that Zhong Xian was thinking the same thing as Chu Xiu. Seeing that Chu Xiu had already started fighting with Zhong Xian, a smile appeared on Ying Bailu's face. "Brother Feng, why don't we spar again?" Feng Qixiao pursed his lips and said, "Fighting with you is the most boring. Ying Bailu, the Ying family always likes to hide things. Can't you show your true strength? If you had used your full strength just now, perhaps Zhang Qingjin wouldn't have been able to become a martial Dao Grandmaster. I'm afraid he would have lost." Ying Bailu shook his head and said, "Some things can't be revealed. Once they are revealed, it will be a hopeless situation. Besides, I didn't hold back just now. No one will hold back against the little celestial master, Zhang Qingjin. Brother Feng, please enlighten me." As soon as he finished speaking, Ying Bailu did not ask if Feng Qixiao agreed or not. Black Qi burst out from his body and condensed into the shape of a black dragon. With an earth-shattering roar, it charged at Feng Qixiao. Everyone was dumbfounded when they saw that. What's going on with them? They were fighting against Zhang Qingjin just now, but now they're fighting on their own. I don't understand. I really don't understand. However, some of the older martial Dao masters nodded. There were many geniuses on the Longhu leaderboard in this generation. Although the little celestial master, Zhang Qingjin, was talented, he could not overshadow the glory of the others. To put it bluntly, the most important thing in the martial Dao lineage was strength. Otherwise, no matter how amazing one's schemes were, they would not be able to withstand a punch that could crush all schemes. Nie Donglu from the morgue of the Longhu leaderboard was also someone like that. However, he was too calculative and neglected his own strength. In the end, he died a violent death. There were many smart people like that in the Jianghu, but unfortunately, there were only a few who could make it to the end. How many of the strongest people who stood at the peak of the Jianghu did not make it to their current position by scheming and scheming? Right now, Chu Xiu and the others did not care about their opponent's background, past grudges, or victory or defeat. They only wanted to hone their strength and fight with all their might in such an occasion where they could gather. That was the right way to go. Of course, for them, this battle was to find a suitable opponent to hone their strength. However, for the people outside, this was also a major reshuffle on the Longhu leaderboard. With Zhang Qingjin gone, who would be the next first on the Longhu leaderboard? Under normal circumstances, it should be Zhong Xian. However, there were too many variables now, and the biggest one was Chu Xiu. When they fought with Zhang Qingjin earlier, everyone could already tell that apart from Li Feilian, who was always looking for opportunities, the only ones who could pose a fatal threat to Zhang Qingjin were Chu Xiu, who attacked fiercely and had extremely explosive power. No one had expected Chu Xiu's improvement to be so great. His accumulation of power had already reached a rather shocking level. Even some of the martial Dao masters present were not confident that they could withstand Chu Xiu's sun-changing skill and colorless ceiling palm without any pressure. Therefore, after this battle, there would definitely be a major reshuffle on the Longhu leaderboard. Who would ascend to the top would depend on this battle. Chu Xiu, Zhong Xian, Feng Qixiao, and Ying Bailu fought separately. However, Li Feilian just stood at the side and watched for a while before he directly retreated and stood at the back to watch the battle from a safe distance. It was not that he did not want to fight, but Li Feilian had already attacked 9 times. The last attack was to risk his life. Now he could only recover his strength and watch the battle from the side. Everyone present was an expert, so they could naturally see Li Feilian's strength. Although Li Feilian had indeed posed a great threat to Zhang Qingjin earlier, his fighting style was still incomparable to Chu Xiu's. He only had the strength to attack 10 times. If he could not kill his opponent with the first 9 attacks, he would risk his life with the 10th attack. In terms of real combat power, there was no doubt that Chu Xiu was above Li Feilian. As for the Taoist connotation floating above the 4 of them, no one dared to snatch it. They just let it float there. This thing did not belong to a single person, but it was the trophy of Chu Xiu and the other 4. If anyone dared to take it at this time, the consequences would be very miserable, so no one wanted to try. Chapter 585. Chu Xiu had only fought with Zhongxian once, but he had a very good understanding of Zhongxian's martial arts. It could be said that Zhongxian's martial arts were of the Buddhist lineage, or rather the most outstanding work of the Great Light Temple lineage. He had already displayed the martial arts of the Great Light Temple lineage to the extreme. Zhongxian had an incomparably powerful physical body, and one could not find any weakness in his entire body. The only way to defeat him was to defeat him head-on with strength. However, in terms of strength, how many people in this world could compare to Zhongxian? In the end, the one who would lose would definitely be you. Therefore, this time, when Chu Xiu attacked Zhongxian, he had already made up his mind from the beginning. He would not give Zhongxian the last chance to exhaust himself. The demonic blade with boundless hatred slashed down. Putting aside the strength of the blade, the hatred had already seeped into the blade intent. It was even similar to the power of the blade of hatred that Chu Xiu used directly. However, it did not have the mystical ability of absorbing hatred as the blade of hatred did, but it could still arouse the hatred in Zhongxian's heart. As the blade fell, Zhongxian formed a Buddhist seal with his hands, and the light of Buddha shone brightly in his palms. He actually directly clamped down on Chu Xiu's heavenly demon dance. His gang qi erupted, and in an instant, all the demonic qi on the heavenly demon dance was dispersed. Moreover, the hatred in Chu Xiu's blade intent did not cause too much harm to Zhongxian, because there was actually no hatred in Zhongxian's heart. Zhongxian had cultivated in the Great Light Temple since he was a child. No one knew what he had experienced to cultivate to this stage, and no one knew how Zhongxian had developed such a character. However, since Chu Xiu's blade was ineffective, it proved that Zhongxian really did not have any hatred in his heart. Although it was somewhat unbelievable, it was the truth. This had already been thought of by the master refiner of the Black Demon Tower, when he was forging the 7 demon blades. Greed, anger, obsession, hate, love, evil, and desire. As long as one was human, they would have 7 emotions and 6 desires, and would be targeted by the 7 demon blades. The blade of hatred was useless, but the other blades might not necessarily work. If a person didn't even have 7 emotions and 6 desires, it could only mean that the other party was no longer human. Regardless of whether the other party had become a god or a demon, it was not something that he could resist. There was no hatred in Zhongxian's heart. Chu Xiu's saber could only make Zhongxian's mind go blank for a moment. In the next moment, he had already reacted. He gripped Chu Xiu's long saber tightly in his hand and burst forth with strength, wanting to twist and break Chu Xiu's heavenly demon dance. However, although Chu Xiu's heavenly demon dance was a 6th transformation precious weapon, it was forged with the foundation of a divine weapon, and it also had the heavenly demon order in it. Even if Zhongxian's body could withstand a divine weapon, he still could not break the heavenly demon dance. In the next moment, Chu Xiu had already retreated. However, at the same time, he performed the great skill of extinguishing sky, extinguishing earth and soul transfer. His powerful mental strength surged towards Zhongxian. The 9 forms of soul engulfing was an extremely sensitive essence soul secret technique, and Chu Xiu dared not use it in public. Therefore, he simply used his mental strength to attack Zhongxian's mind. The swastika symbol rose on Zhong Xian's forehead and offset most of the mental strength. However, some of it still seeped into Zhong Xian's mind, causing him to groan uncontrollably. The gang qi around him was trembling, and he seemed to be unable to control it. At this moment, the Buddha flame around Chu Xiu rose, and the shadow of Vairocana appeared behind Chu Xiu. The light of Buddha illuminated the entire hall. At this moment, Chu Xiu looked even more like a Buddhist expert than Zhong Xian. Vairocana's palm landed and a powerful aura erupted. The power caused the expressions of some martial Dao masters to change slightly. Previously, Chu Xiu had used the great skill of changing sun to deal with Zhang Qingjin. Given Zhang Qingjin's strength, he could only resist it with the thunder talisman under Chu Xiu's great skill of changing sun, and he was even blasted into the ground by Chu Xiu. Zhong Xian's defense was much stronger than Zhang Qingjin's. He formed a seal with his hand, and the Buddha light around him turned into a quiet moonlight. The pharmacist's glazed light King Buddha Dharma rose behind Zhong Xian, and a seal landed, clashing head-on with Chu Xiu's great skill of changing Sunday. However, under the powerful power of the great skill of changing sun, Zhong Xian was forced to retreat step by step. Although he was not injured, he was already at a disadvantage. Chu Xiu's expression did not change. Although he had the upper hand now, he could see that Zhong Xian was still uninjured, and his strength was still as strong as ever. Chu Xiu took a step forward and boundless Buddhist light gathered in his palm. Sumeru mustard seed, life and death of the universe, colorless fixed palm imprint. As Chu Xiu's imprint landed, everything in its path was disintegrated and strangled. The Buddha light was extinguished, and even the pharmacist's glazed light King Buddha Dharma behind Zhong Xian was completely shattered. The great skill of changing sun, coupled with the formless sealing palm imprint, was so powerful that even Chu Xiu did not expect it. If Master Tam Yuan had used it when he was at his peak in the past, he would have the power to shake heaven and earth. Moreover, seeing that Zhong Xian was defeated by Chu Xiu's series of horrifying attacks, the people present suddenly burst into an uproar. After all, he was Zhong Xian, who was ranked second on the Longhu leaderboard. However, he did not seem to be able to retaliate against Chu Xiu's attacks at all. The gap between them was too great. Could it be that he had exhausted too much of his energy in the battle with Zhang Qingjin? At this time, Su Xing did not even care about snatching the Taoist connotation. Instead, he stared straight at the battlefield. He could not help but want to attack. Zhong Xian could not be defeated. To the Great Light Temple, Zhong Xian was their Great Light Temple's face. Previously, Zhong Xian was ranked below Zhang Qingjin. This was not a big deal. After all, he was also a stunning figure that only appeared once in 1,000 years in the Dao sect. The Dao sect and the Buddhist sect were always competing, and both sides had their wins and losses. Moreover, Zhong Xian was not too far behind Zhang Qingjin. However, Chu Xiu was different. Zhong Xian could not lose to Chu Xiu. The disciple that the Great Light Temple had painstakingly nurtured had lost to a warrior of humble origins. Even if Zhang Qingjin had left the Longhu list, Zhong Xian could not become number one. If Zhong Xian really lost, these comments would definitely spread throughout the underworld. However, Su Xing held back and did not attack in the end. If he did, the Great Light Temple would lose even more face. Interfering with a fight between juniors. One could afford to fight but could not afford to lose. This kind of reputation was not good. Moreover, Guan Ziyu was watching. If he dared to openly interrupt a fight between juniors, not only would he be despised by others, but Guan Ziyu would also not stand idly by. At this time on Zhong Xian's side, although he had been crushed by Chu Xiu, Zhong Xian's own strength was extremely strong, so he was not injured. However, the more he fought, the brighter Zhong Xian's eyes became. Although no one could see the expression on Zhong Xian's statue-like face, Zhong Xian was currently furious. In such a long time, almost no one could suppress him to this extent. Even when he had fought one-on-one with Zhang Qingjin in the past, it had not happened. Although this did not mean that Chu Xiu was stronger than him or Zhang Qingjin. In terms of explosive power, Chu Xiu's endless miraculous martial arts techniques were indeed more difficult to deal with than Zhang Qingjin's. If he fought rationally, Zhong Xian could just passively defend and wait until Chu Xiu exhausted 90% of his strength before attacking. He would almost certainly win. However, At this time, Zhongxian's heart was already burning with rage. He did not want to defend anymore. Zhongxian was human, not a god. He also had emotions and desires. At this time, Chu Xiu could not use the 7-demon saber. If he could use the 7-demon saber, the angry saber would undoubtedly be the most useful for the current Zhongxian. Endless Buddha's aura condensed around Zhongxian. The Buddha's aura burned fiercely and turned into Buddha's flame. As Zhongxian formed the Wisdom King seal in his hand, a 4-faced, 8-armed Wisdom King shadow appeared amidst the raging flames of the Buddha light. It had a ferocious and terrifying expression, and on its 8 arms, there were all sorts of weapons formed from Gangqi, and it attacked Chu Xiu. The Sky Demon Dance was held in Chu Xiu's hand. The power of Chu Xiu's sun-changing technique was raised to the extreme by Chu Xiu. The qi and blood around his body were boiling and burning. The Golden Buddha's flame flowed, and actually plated the Sky Demon Dance with a layer of Golden Buddha's flame. As the saber slashed down, the Buddha's flame carried a monstrous demonic energy. At the same time, Chu Xiu's heaven's sun gazing at air was also displayed to the extreme by him. Even though Zhongxian's angry Wisdom King had the power of 8 arms, it was completely blocked by Chu Xiu's saber. The Buddha's light and devil's flame exploded and danced. The power was almost comparable to the scene when the 5 people besieged Zhongqingjin. Su Xing's face was extremely gloomy. To the warriors of the Great Light Temple, cultivating both devil and Buddha was simply an insult. However, he could not find anything wrong with Chu Xiu being able to cultivate Buddhist martial arts to this level. This was because Chu Xiu was the successor of holy monk Tan Yuan. Master Tam Yuan's reputation in the underworld was well known. Even if his successor cultivated demonic arts, he would not be a member of the demonic path. This was a halo. Even if the people of the underworld did not believe in Chu Xiu, they believed in Master Tam Yuan. At this moment, Chu Wuji was watching the battle between Chu Xiu and Zhongxian. He raised his eyebrows and whispered to Mr. Lu, "This kid is not simple. Everyone thinks that he is a dual cultivator of Taoism and Buddhism. In fact, he is a dual cultivator of Taoism, Buddhism and demonic Tao." Mr. Lu said in surprise. He has also cultivated Taoist martial arts. Mr. Lu knew Chu Xiu better, but he did not take the initiative to ask Chu Xiu what kind of martial arts he had cultivated. After all, this kind of thing was a taboo. However, in the outside world, Chu Xiu had not taken the initiative to reveal any strong Taoist martial arts. Chu Wuji laughed and said, "It's normal that you can't see it. Taoist martial arts are righteous and peaceful, and the most important thing is the foundation." This kid used the Taoist foundation as his bones and built a very solid foundation, which is why he has such a cultivation today. If I'm not wrong, the first martial art he cultivated should be from the Taoist lineage. He used the righteous and peaceful Taoist method to harmonize the power of the Devil Buddha. Whether it was unintentional or intentional, this method not only made the 3 kinds of power in his body reach a delicate balance, but also can even complement each other. This kid is a talent. His potential is no less than that of the little celestial master, who just stepped into the martial Tao Grand Master realm. Mr. Lu looked at Chu Wuji in surprise. He did not expect that Chu Wuji would give such a high evaluation of Chu Xiu. It should be known that Chu Wuji was actually a genius. In the past, he was also ranked in the top 5 on the Longhu list. Now, he was the most promising martial Tao Grand Master in the Yinma clan, to step into the true fire spiritual refinement realm. In the entire Yinma clan, there were not many people who could be regarded as worthy by Chu Wuji. You're tuning in to the Echoes of the Heart YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.